Today on CityCast Philly, it's the Friday News Roundup. We're talking about how President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump are polling in Pennsylvania. Plus, a leadership change this week at the Citizen Police Oversight Commission, and more on the agency's key priorities. It's Friday, May 17th. I'm Trinine Uri, and here's what Philly's talking about. Joining me this week is Julia Taruso, political reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer. Great to have you back.
Thanks for having me back, Trinine.
And Rodrigo Terrion, criminal justice and law enforcement reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer. Welcome back to CityCast Philly.
Thanks, Trinine. It's good to be back.
Before we get into some of the news of the week, I want to talk about how the Philadelphia Parking Authority is cracking down on illegal parked cars. And this is all a part of its ADA Mobility Access Initiative. All of this started on Monday this week. According to 6ABC, PPA started issuing tickets for vehicles that block sidewalks, curb ramps, and crosswalks. The fines for this type of violation are $76 in Center City and $51 in other neighborhoods. So my question for you both is, what is the most ridiculous way you've seen someone park a car illegally in Philly?
I mean, I've seen a lot of the kind of unofficial, unwritten law parking cone, save spaces.
Oh, savesies, yeah.
Exactly. And then I've also just seen cars straight up on like a corner right by a stop sign, but not in the street, just on the actual sidewalk. So it gets pretty crazy out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're most famous for the median on Broad Street, but I'm up in Fishtown, Kensington, and sometimes people will park just like catty corner, I think what Rodrigo's talking about, by a stop sign and leave their car there all night.
Yeah, it's wild stuff. Yeah.
I'm glad they're cracking down, though. I mean, I find this city hard to run around in, as it is. I can't imagine people who have others, more struggles.
Yeah, I think it's wild that this is the first time, or that they're basically saying we haven't been doing this and we're starting now.
Right.
I thought that was just supposed to be a thing that they enforced already, but...
Now, parking can be a challenge in some neighborhoods, right? Where it's like those one-way streets or, the streets that are like super, super narrow. You have to put your car on the curb. Like half the cars in the street and half the cars on the sidewalk. I'm not sure if that's completely illegal, but I've seen that happen.
Well, and I feel like if a whole block does it, then they're kind of protected.
Right. All right, let's get into some other news stories of the week. Julia, I've been reading some headlines this week that say President Joe Biden is not polling well among Pennsylvania voters as we inch closer to the general election in November. Historically, Democrats and Biden have done well in Philly, right? But are we seeing a possible shift even just since the last election in 2020?
That's absolutely what it looks like. And, all of the caveats, there's 6 months until the election. There's a lot of money that's going to be spent. People are going to start paying more attention closer to November. But this poll that we did with the New York Times and Siena College showed former President Donald Trump up by about 3 points. It's within the margin of error. So we're calling it kind of a dead heat in Pennsylvania. But I think more concerning for President Biden, as you alluded to, is we saw a real kind of drop off on some key Democratic constituencies for him. So when you look at young voters, that population is about split between Trump and Biden. Now we're talking about all of Pennsylvania. And while Biden is still winning Philadelphia voters, it's not by as much as, he was when you looked at polling in 2020, when you looked at the election results in 2020.
Can you remind us why in a presidential election year, all eyes are on the Commonwealth?
Oh, I'd be happy to. It's why I have a job. So Pennsylvania is one of, 6 really swing states that will likely decide the presidential election. And there's some argument that it could be the deciding state because it's the swing state with the most electoral college votes. You drill down a little further, it's a state that really mimics the country as a whole in terms of, the average age of our population, the demographics, mix of rural areas, big cities, medium-sized cities, and Philadelphia and the collar counties, I should say, the suburban collar counties are just a huge part of which way Pennsylvania goes. And for Democrats, they are the key ingredient. The more they can turn out their base here, the better chances they have of winning the state and potentially the presidency.
Julia, can you tell me more about the poll? Who did you poll? Who was polled, etc.?
Sure. So it was technically 1,023 registered voters in Pennsylvania. It was conducted from the end of April 28th to May 7th. And the poll had a margin of error of about 3.6 percentage points. We polled all over the state. So I think we broke it down into 5 different regions, including Philadelphia, the suburbs, kind of the Lehigh Valley, central part of the state, Allegheny, western part of the state. So that might be six regions. So it's a really good snapshot of the electorate, I would say, at this point in the election year.
So you mentioned like a possible shift in young voters. What have been some of the biggest shifts demographically, according to the poll?
Yeah, so in addition to young voters, there was also an erosion of support for Biden among voters of color. And, again, that's still a group of voters he's winning, but not nearly as overwhelmingly as he was in 2020. This is a state that was decided by a little over 1 percentage point then. So any of these shifts could really matter. And, I think the other thing that is not great news for him is when you look at how voters feel about the issues and who they trust more on the issues. Trump is winning almost across the board. He's more trusted on the economy, which we know is a big one, for all of the electorate, but including young voters and voters of color. We did some polling on crime and found that Trump is more trusted on that, even as he's recently been sitting in a Manhattan courtroom, on his own trial. So there's some concern, I would say, for Biden in terms of the issues there, too. The exception is abortion, in which an issue on which Biden polls overwhelmingly more positively than Trump when it comes to abortion rights and women's reproductive rights.
Are the results of this poll, do they seem to match Biden's overall approval rating?
I would say this poll echoed similar polls of Pennsylvania. Again, since we're such an important state, there's a lot of polling in the state. When I first saw the results, I was like, oh, there's nothing, super surprising here. But then I said, oh, that probably means it's, kind of a decent poll. It's showing what other polls have shown. And you mentioned favorability. Both Biden and Trump are polling very unfavorably in Pennsylvania. And that does match other polls of Pennsylvania, other polls of swing states. So the challenge for both of these candidates is kind of, if it is a tie right now in May, where do they pull more voters in from when they're starting from a pretty negative position?
In your reporting, you also highlighted the surrounding counties and how they might vote. Between Trump and Biden, who's stronger in what counties?
The Philadelphia suburbs have, in recent years, been big Democratic strongholds, and that does stay true in this poll. Biden is polling much better than Trump in the suburbs. And one thing we didn't talk about is the poll also measured support for Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the independent running for president, and he brought in about 10% of the vote at this point in time, which is very high for a independent candidate and could have an impact on the result if he stays at that level.
You can read more of Julia's reporting by clicking the link in our show notes. More news of the week after the break. Shifting gears, Philly's Citizen Police Oversight Commission, which was established by City Council in 2022 after the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, has a new executive director. But Rodrigo, before we get into who the new head of this agency is, can you just remind us what's been going on in the last year within the agency?
Sure. So the Citizens Police Oversight Commission, just as the name portends, is it's supposed to be a civilian-led and run police oversight agency that basically does a whole host of things. It's supposed to investigate independently complaints against police officers and the police department by citizens. And this iteration of the agency actually is supposed to have a lot more teeth, so to speak, than its previous iteration, which was called the Police Advisory Commission. This commission, in its current form, has subpoena power, it has access to crime scene and police records. And because it has subpoena power, it can essentially conduct its own investigations. And it has an investigation unit that is supposed to do those things. And the reality is, in the past 2 or so years that it's been operational, they have investigated zero citizen complaints against the police department, which is its primary goal and mission. It's also had a pretty tumultuous last year. Last spring, three of the nine commissioners that are on the agency resigned. They resigned in protest of what they say was an environment of infighting and these petty power moves. Their words, of course. Basically, there's allegations of infighting between staff and commissioners and just a lot of discord, an
Hmm.
environment that has essentially prevented any progress from being made at the commission. There's been instances of fights or pretty heated arguments at some of the meetings that the commission has had. So this new executive director is coming on the heels of that. She's arriving. She just started Monday, May 13th, after it was announced that she was hired back in April.
And her name is Tanya McClary. Who is she? What's her background?
So Tanya McClary is a former top police watchdog in Dallas. She's a former police monitor of the Dallas Police Department, which is, of course, one of the larger cities in the country. She's an attorney, and she was a public defender for most of her career as an attorney. So she comes from a history career of police accountability. She told me in interviews that we've had prior that basically she wanted to get into this type of work because as a public defender she saw a lot of the best case scenarios for police investigations and a lot of the worst case scenarios. She also did criminal justice work for the American Friends Service Committee when she was in Philadelphia years ago. She actually was in Philadelphia and lived here for, I think, 7 years, she told me. So she's been doing this work for most of her career, and she got into it. Obviously, she had the credentials over in Dallas, and for the time that the Citizens Police Oversight Commission has been active, they had been operating with an acting interim executive director, and Tanya will now become the new permanent executive director.
What goals does she have for the agency and overall police accountability?
So Tanya's goals, top of mind for her, from what she's told me, is to basically jumpstart investigations, these independent investigations that have yet to happen. And that has been the primary goal of the agency. So the investigation unit, she says that she hopes to staff up there at the investigation unit so that they can start not just taking complaints and reviewing them, but actively starting their investigations. um, Her overall mission is that she wants police accountability essentially to be synonymous with the Citizens Police Oversight Commission. So any issues pertaining to civilian and police interactions, any questions or concerns when it comes to police oversight, for Philadelphians to immediately think of CPOC, think of the agency, and think of them as a resource. So that those are her main goals. She, of course, also hopes to kind of work through the backlog of complaints. I believe that they want to start moving forward in independent investigations, but also look at some of the things that have happened in recent years. And she said the time is right. It's kind of the climate is right, considering there have been some, I guess, noteworthy, or there have been some instances of some pretty stark police civilian interactions in the last year. Eddie Irizarry comes to mind. So she says that the time is right for the agency to finally kind of get started in earnest with their mission.
Do you know if critics of CPOC are optimistic about her ability to accomplish these goals?
There's definitely some optimism because of her credentials, because of her experience. They believe that she's been doing this work for some time now. So her coming on as an executive director to kind of, help steer the ship, so to speak, is a positive. It's hopefully going to kind of kickstart the goals, which is of course to serve as this kind of civilian-led, objective police oversight agency.
You can read more of Rodrigo's reporting by clicking the link in our show notes. That was Rodrigo Terrejon, criminal justice and law enforcement reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer, and Julia Taruso, political reporter at the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thank you both so much for joining me on CityCast Philly.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
It's time for the tip of the week, where we share a life hack for living in Philly. It's that time of year when you might see more construction projects in your neighborhood. The Philadelphia Water Department actually released detailed information about their construction projects around the city. You can check out the list at water.phila.gov/projects. The Water Department also is encouraging residents to send any questions or concerns about construction to them as well. We'll have the links in our show notes. If you have a tip of the week, we'd love to hear from you too. Call or text us at 215-259-8170. That's all for today here on CityCast Philly. Our producers are Abby Fritz and Lizzie Goldsmith. Our Hey Philly newsletter editor is Asha Prahar. And our host is me, Trinae Nuri. Special thanks goes to our outgoing executive producer, Laura Benshoff. Laura, thank you so much for making CityCast Philly strong. Much success on your next opportunity. Music is by Philly's own Interminable, with additional music from All the Kimonos and James Weldon. If you enjoyed this week of episodes, please tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and make sure you subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey Philly. We'll be back Monday morning with more news from around the city. Have a great weekend, y'all, and be safe.